Hi, my name is Kathy Worth. I'm a nursing advisor at the College of Registered Nurses of Saskatchewan. Today, I will be looking at documentation. Before we get into documentation, I'd like to share some statistics. 1 in 17 hospital stays in Canada involved at least one harmful event. In 2022-23 in Saskatchewan, there were 145 critical incidents. Critical incidents are defined as the actual or potential loss of life, limb, or function related to a health service by Saskatchewan Health Authority, Saskatchewan Cancer Agency, or Health Services Care Organization. When these types of incidents happen, documentation is looked at very closely to create a picture of what happened. The importance of having accurate documentation is so someone can piece together the events. It is crucial and one of the most important things we do as RNs. The College of Registered Nurses of Saskatchewan acknowledges that we operate on Treaty 4 territory and additionally act in the public's interest on Treaty 2, 5, 6, 8, and 10. We acknowledge the truth of our past, its place in our present, and the ongoing impact it has on our future. We are committed to truth and reconciliation, and we honor the Indigenous lands on which we live and work and stand with all Indigenous people as their healing takes place. I am thankful for the land I live, work, and play on, and pay my respects to the original caretakers of this land. Here's the outline of this presentation. It is our objective that by the end of this session, each one of you will walk away with a renewed investment in the RN's professional responsibility to accurately and thoroughly document the care you provide and the outcomes for the client. The purpose of this presentation is to support the application of RN standards and competencies for documentation of client care. To begin today's presentation, we will start with an overview of regulatory authority, which includes CRNS mandate and foundational RN documents, the principles of documentation, employer policies, and a few examples. As you know, the CRNS is the professional-led regulatory body for registered nursing in Saskatchewan. The CRNS is accountable for public protection by ensuring members are competent. The Registered Nurses Act of 1988 provides the legislative authority for RNs to practice nursing in Saskatchewan. The Act enables the CRNS to create bylaws for council, code of ethics, practice standards, competencies, and the rights and privileges within these categories. The CRNS acts on behalf of the public to ensure nurses provide safe, competent, and ethical care for the people of Saskatchewan. RNs have a professional responsibility to accurately and thoroughly document the care they provide and the outcomes for the client. Documentation is a legal obligation. Thorough documentation needs to be part of the care you provide. It is not outside or removed from the care or an afterthought or something to get through. It is a vital component of the care you provide. There are standards and competencies that directly apply to documentation, and they would include Standard 1, professional responsibility and accountability, demonstrating effective collaborative practice, including communication, problem-solving strategies, decision-making, and conflict resolution. Practice Standard 2, knowledge-based practice, utilizing nursing informatics and other information and communications technology in practicing safe registered nursing care. Standard 3, ethical practice, communicating respectfully and effectively in collaboration with client, family, colleagues, and others, and resolving conflict should it occur. Entry-level competency communicator, RNs document and report clearly, concisely, accurately, and in a timely manner. And the Code of Ethics, providing safe, compassionate, competent, and ethical care, taking all necessary actions to prevent or minimize patient safety incidents. They learn from near misses and work with others to reduce the potential for future risks and preventable harms. I encourage you to take a bit of time and review those 3 foundational documents to decipher other entry-level competencies, practice standards, or code of ethic principles that apply to your practice, and specifically documentation. Principles of documentation. So what are the principles of documentation? Well, documentation is a nursing action that produces a written and/or electronic account of pertinent client data, nursing clinical decisions and interventions, and the client's responses in a health record. Documentation establishes accountability for care, promotes quality nursing care, facilitates communication among RNs and other healthcare providers, and conveys the contribution of RN to healthcare. Documentation is not separate from care, and it is not optional. It is a component of patient care. Nursing documentation provides a timeline of care. Documentation can be used to determine what nursing care was provided to the client. It identifies the caregiver and records evidence the nursing process was carried out, including the client's health outcome and the client's response to care. It promotes continuity of care through interprofessional communication, demonstrates the RN's accountability to providing safe, competent, and ethical care. For more information on documentation, there is a documentation guideline on the CRNS website. Why? To start with, the client's health record is a legal document. A client's record can be used as evidence in legal proceedings to reconstruct the sequence of events related to the care of the client. Secondly, RNs are required to document evidence of safe, competent, and ethical care in accordance with current practice standards, entry-level competencies, code of ethics, and agency policy. RNs demonstrate accountability for safe, competent, and ethical care through documentation in the client health record. Documentation should reflect the RN's professional judgment, assessment, coordination of care, decisions, actions, and evaluations. Those reading the documentation should be able to determine the care that was provided, the client who received the care, the RN who provided care, when the care was provided, date and time, why the care was provided, so the assessment of the client's response to the care provided, and the client outcome. Furthermore, nursing documentation provides data for risk management and quality improvement tools for the RN and the employer. Using information gathered from client records, RNs and employers can note trends and maximize client safety by identifying and managing the risks effectively. Documentation also supports the allocation of resources, workload measurement, and fiscal utilization, as well as research findings that support the development of evidence-informed practice, which can include supporting workload measurement, staffing requirements, and skill mix required for safe, competent care. Who documents? Legal and professional principles dictate that the RN who provided client care should be the individual who documents in the client's health record. If two or more people are providing care to a client, the RN, who is the assigned primary caregiver, has the responsibility to document the assessment, intervention, and the client's response to the care provided. Any subsequent care provider is expected to review the existing documentation and make any additional entries to the client record as necessary. They are also responsible for signing their entry in the client healthcare record. If the entry requires a co-signature, it should be completed according to agency policy. Agency policy related to the co-signing of entries should indicate the intent of a co-signature and in what circumstances co-signing is required. RNs do not routinely need a co-signature for their entries in a client record. Third-party documentation or documenting for others is not prudent practice for RNs. However, as you know, there are situations where third-party documentation may be appropriate. Some examples are code situations or procedural events like in an operating room, endoscopy, labor, and birth. Third-party documentation can lead to errors or inaccuracies in the client record that may affect the provision of safe, competent care for the client. In the case of litigation, documentation that has been completed by a third party may not be admissible in a court proceeding, or the credibility of the documentation may be called into question. Please note the CRNS does not support the co-signing of documentation completed by students. How? Most of this will be a review for you. I encourage you to reflect on your charting habits as we go through the next slides. All entries should use professional language and terminology and be completed according to agency policy. RNs should not leave any blank or white spaces in the body of their documentation, as it presents an opportunity for others to alter previously completed documentation. Errors and/or changes to the client's health record should be corrected according to agency policy for accuracy and to avoid falsifying the record. When completing electronic documentation, the same principles of documentation apply as for paper-based documentation. The Health Information Protection Act, HIPAA, is the legislation that outlines the requirements to ensure the privacy and confidentiality of health records. Abbreviations are common in the healthcare system. For example, RN is an abbreviation, LPN, MD, and you get the idea. Abbreviations, acronyms, or symbols can improve efficiencies in documentation if their meaning is well understood by all. Only abbreviations approved by the employer should be used in the client health record. Abbreviation potential risks. There could be look-alike or sound-alike confusion. They could be subject to misinterpretation, or it may make the document illegible. So the practice of using abbreviations works as long as it is clearly defined. There are some that can be dangerous. The Institute for Safe Medication Practices has created documents related to abbreviations and the dangers of using them when documenting. Please see the ISMP website for more information. The ISMP Canada provides a list of unacceptable abbreviations with rationale for the warning and suggests the correct way to document the intended meaning. Now we will look at the ISMP chart for examples. So let's look at some examples of abbreviations, intended meaning, problem, and correction. I myself have used many of these. For example, QD or QOD, every day or every other day. QD and QOD have been mistaken for each other or as QID. The Q also has been misinterpreted as a 2. So the suggestion would be to use the word daily and the words every other day. And you can see there's other examples on here. On this slide, the one that I have seen a lot uh, is the greater than and less than symbol. Oftentimes they are confused with each other. So ISMP recommends using the words greater than or more than, or less than, lower than. Electronic documentation. The same principles of documentation apply for electronic documentation as for paper-based documentation. RNs have the same ethical and legal obligations to maintain confidentiality of client records when documenting in an electronic format as they have for paper-based charting. Electronic documentation may need additional safeguards such as encryption to prevent unauthorized access to the client health record. To ensure the security of client health records, policies, procedures, and specific technologies need to be in place. To help minimize the potential for a risk, it is suggested that you create strong passwords and change them frequently. Do not share your password or any other access information with others. Log off or lock the screen when you are leaving the terminal. Protect the monitor from visualization by others when making entries in client records. Report unauthorized access or use of your electronic signature to your employer, and do not log on for someone else. What? What should we be documenting? Point of care RNs are required to document all aspects of the nursing process: assessment, planning, implementation, and evaluation. Documentation of the care provided must be consistent, clear, factual, and reflect the RN's critical thinking when providing client care. Objective information, facts related to the client's status that are observed or measured. Assessment interventions and the client's response to care provided. The entry should end with your signature and designation. Initials can be used so long as they are included on the master list. Admissions, transfers, transports, and discharge information are also documented. Your documentation is a communication tool among care providers. It must be accurate and easy to read and understand. Document behaviors instead of making judgments. So client shouting and aggressive versus client drunk. Client education and their response should also be documented. Adverse events and incident reports need to be documented as well. At times, a client may suffer an adverse event such as a fall, injury, or incorrect dosage or missed dose of a medication. In case of an adverse event, the RN shall objectively record the event and the care provided. RN should avoid the use of words error, incident, or accident when documenting. Avoid assumptions, conclusions, and judgments about the event. Follow your agency policy when completing incident reports. Incident reports are generally separate from the client's health record, but the completion of an incident reporting form following an adverse event should be documented in the client's health record. Reporting of adverse events is important from a quality improvement perspective. Incident reports can identify system issues that need to be addressed to support client and staff safety. So standard 1, professional responsibility and accountability. The registered nurse is responsible for practicing safely, competently, and ethically, and is accountable to the client, public, employer, and profession. The registered nurse upholds this standard by practicing in accordance with agency policy and legislation, and in a timely manner, recognizes and reports near misses and errors, their own and others, adverse events and critical incidents, and taking action to stop and minimize them. When? RNs should document frequently, chronologically, and promptly. All documentation should be completed according to agency policy. Principles of documentation: chronological. Documentation should never be completed before it occurs. Late entries can be made in the client's health record to document the information according to agency policy. And again, any transitions in client care such as admission, discharge, transfer, or transport should be documented. Employer policies. Organizational policies and procedures describe what and how things will be done to standardize care consistent with evidence-informed practice guidelines and to reduce risk and liability. Hospitals or organizations need good policies and procedures to function effectively and efficiently and keep both employees and clients safe. Not only do policies promote consistency and protect the organization and employees and patients, but they also define and shape culture, communicate expectations to employees, and guide day-to-day operations. During legal proceedings, involved staff are usually evaluated against their normal practice, existing regulatory standards, and related organization professional practice guideline in place at the time of the event. So it is important that employer policies are well written and clear about the expectations. Know your employer policy for documenting critical incidents. If an incident does occur, policies and procedures serve as evidence that the hospital has standards in place that comply with regulations. It is important to be aware of organizational policies and procedures around documenting critical incidents. So we have looked at principles of documentation as well as the who, what, when, and how. So now we will look at some charting examples. So here are some examples of some poor charting, and I'm sure we've all seen examples of poor charting in our careers. So in summary, documentation of client care should be completed promptly with as much detail required to present an accurate and thorough representation of the client's health status and the nursing care provided. This enhances continuity of care and safety for the client. RNs demonstrate professional responsibility and accountability through consistent and accurate documentation. Thank you for your time, and that concludes our presentation. Thank you.